Hello everyone, my name is Daniela Nottage. My topic is de-escalating confronting behaviour. I'm going to begin by discussing what is confronting behaviour and addressing the level of behaviour being discussed in this mini presentation. Let's look at the term confront. Confront means to face a situation that can be uncomfortable or to say something to someone about something that they have done that bothers you. Rather than letting things go, you may confront it. However, how we confront things, or whether we choose to confront, is dependent on the situation, how prior confrontation was modelled to us in order to confront appropriately, and how much control we have over ourselves. In this mini presentation, I will be discussing the de-escalation of confronting behaviour with students that are defiant and or frustrated to an extreme. Prior to this, I just want to discuss an experience I had on my second year placement. I was in a year 2-3 class, and this particular class had 40% of students with either negative defiance disorder on the autism spectrum, fetal alcohol syndrome, and or diagnosed with ADHD. This class had a rainbow of behaviours, but my mentor was amazing and she knew every student in her class really well. On one particular day, a student, let's call her Jane, started her day a little quiet and wanting her space. Through the morning lessons, she participated at a minimum and did not want anyone to talk, approach, or look at her. My mentor was seeing signs of a brewing behaviour pattern and asked Jane if she would like to spend time in the cooling off area. This corner had pillows, fidgets, sensory items, and she had nodded her head and walked over there and stayed there until recess. Her teacher had provided her with earmuffs, knowing this was a tool that had helped Jane previously to de-escalate. Jane went out to recess, however. On re-entering the classroom, she looked frustrated and angry, her cheeks were red and she was frowning. And my mentor approached her to try and talk to her, but she refused by answering through noises and grunts. My mentor rang through to the school's behaviour specialist and discussed Jane's situation from the day. The behaviour specialist asked my mentor teacher to just keep her content for now, and he will make a visit to the classroom before lunchtime if there was no improvement. Jane stayed in the corner, her face still red, still frowning. By now she has started to make little grunts, muffling into a pillow. My mentor teacher was keeping a watchful eye on her with visual cues, allowing June to know she was still there and she was still concerned for her. My mentor would make regular eye contact, arms by her side, using a thumbs up to communicate if Jane was still okay. When the lunch bell went, my mentor and I had yard duty, so all students had to leave. This time, Jane did not want to move, and instead she just erupted. When my mentor teacher asked Jane to go outside and play, her grunts turned into deep belly screams, sounding more like you're trying to scare someone rather than a scream of being scared. As I looked over to my mentor teacher in shock by the turn of events, pillows began to fly through the air towards myself and my mentor, and I had put up my arms to block them. However, as soon as the pillows had run out, she began to throw chairs. Being so quick with her throwing, I had to use my arms to block the chairs and hurt my arm in the process, but saved my mentor from a head knock. My mentor had myself and my peer PST clear the room, and she held the door tight so that Jane couldn't move out of the class to hurt anyone else. My mentor used her mobile to get direct help from the behaviour management specialist, who was very quick. By this time, Jane had thrown chairs and moved tables to barricade herself into the classroom. Don't forget, Jane is in a year 2-3 class. She is only a little thing, and she is still screaming at the top of her lungs. There were windows looking into the classroom, so my mentor, the behaviour specialist, and the principal were able to keep an eye on her. Jane's parents were called in by the time they got to Jane, and Jane had been screaming and throwing things now for 30 minutes. During this time, the behaviour specialist was talking to her in a calm voice. and trying to use phrases that could have Jane thinking reasonably again. My peer PST and myself were instructed to take the rest of the class after the lunch bell to the library to make sure they remain in a safe area rather than back in the classroom. The library was 5 classrooms over and we could still hear Jane screaming. 15 minutes into the library time and my peer PST and I saw the parents carry their daughter by the hands and feet, screaming and wriggling around. Shoes and socks had been taken off, perhaps to use as something to throw out of the schoolyard and into the car. Meeting with the mentor teacher again, she looked frazzled. Apparently, Jane's dad had used his shoulder quite hard to push his way into the classroom through the barricade. However, once inside, all hopes of being able to try and talk to Jane were completely lost. She was in hysterics and uncontrollable by the staff or her parents. At the end of the day, once the students had all gone home, my peer PST and myself were debriefed with our mentor teacher and with the behaviour specialist. We had to provide information on what we observed in the classroom leading up to the confronting behaviour, and we were counselled with our own feelings towards what had happened. Choosing this topic has allowed me to deconstruct my experience and identify what strategies could have been used using theoretical concepts learnt from this week. Before I move on, perhaps take a moment to think of a situation where you have been a part of directly or indirectly with a confrontation. Try and remember, what was it about? How did it make you feel? How was it resolved? What was resolved? What were the non-verbal and verbal dialogue? Perhaps take this time to pause and reflect, and if you feel comfortable, discuss with the group. The reading for the topic discusses modelling self-control. It identifies the early warning signs of confronting behaviour and how to handle a violent student behaviour. Modelling self-control is very important. One of the principles for managing learning environments is human relationships, and the effects of those relationships are the building blocks of early development. Controlling our behaviour and how we approach confrontation can affect how we develop relationships with others. Jones and Jones mentioned that self-control requires us to be smart and guard ourselves against our vulnerabilities. Through modelling self-control to students, you are displaying a calm behaviour when responding to negative student behaviour by taking deep breaths, making mental notes that you are equipped to handle a negative behaviour situation, by not showing emotional distress or heightened emotional states, and using positive language for positive reinforcement. In reference to Jane, she was unable to control her behaviour and it escalated to becoming out of control. Her teacher was modelling self-control, however Jane's hysteria was not allowing herself to calm down and be in a position to calm down. Therefore, her teacher required immediate extra assistance, who also modelled self-control, provided a calm exterior, and used positive language. The Jones and Jones reading discussed early warning signs of confronting behaviour. These are stopping work, refusing to talk, looking angry or upset, making comments under their breath, looking anxious or depressed, disengaging from groups by turning away or looking distracted. Jane presented all of these signs. However, Jones and Jones discussed further to respond thoughtfully and with the purpose of de-escalating the behaviour through several options. Going through these, I tend to wonder in hindsight what could have been used to de-escalate Jane's confronting behaviour mounting up. The options Jones and Jones ask us to explore are the following. You can expand on the active listening technique when you identify the feelings the students may be experiencing. Send an I message to let the student know the behaviour is creating discomfort for you, and include a clear positive statement about your expectations. Offer assistance such as scaffolding, reiteration of the task, or a breakdown of the task. Provide options to the student who may require a task alternative or self-soothing strategy. Predict a positive choice and its consequences. For example, I think if you tried two problems and then asked your partner for help, you would know what to do or what to ask for, and you'd get help before you become too frustrated. State the expectation in a positive manner. Review available options and consequences and give the student space and time to make a choice. Walk away and give a student space. Clarify that the student must make a choice. Structure a brief break for the student. Develop a menu of strategies for the student from which they can select when confronted with a frustrating situation. All of these options coincide with the managing learning environment principle. Effective teaching practice should respect children's human dignity. Jones and Jones mentioned that by following these responses, you are maintaining student dignity while adhering to the teacher's expectations that all students follow the agreed on behaviour standards. Jones and Jones move on to discuss how to handle a violent situation. One of the common themes is knowing the importance of staying calm when responding to student behaviour. The managing learning environment principle, children's learning is best supported when their teacher uses authoritative approaches involving care and guidance, represents this quite well. The consequence of displaying too much emotion can make the student with behaviour problems too caught up in your emotions to think clearly about their own emotions and behaviour. Presented in a violent situation, it is important for teachers to have procedures for protecting themselves. Firstly, there is an emphasis to send for assistance. This will aid to keep your students safe by providing extra protection. And also, having an extra adult can also be a witness to the interventions of yourself amongst the violent situation. The reading mentions that some schools have someone that take a red card to the office, which creates an instant reaction from the staff to let them know that immediate action is required or immediate help is required to the site. Secondly, you should refrain from any negative or confrontational language that can increase the violent situation. Instead, you can acknowledge that the students have rights and are allowed to have strong feelings and offer assistance. What is also important to talk about with a calm and direct voice is the consequences the student faces if they continue, and that you don't want the student to make the wrong decision because they may not be thinking clearly. Third, it is important to show non-verbal cues and talk in a calm voice. By presenting yourself with your arms by your side in direct view of the student with adequate space so that the student does not feel confronted, will be effective by not increasing the heightened emotions the student is feeling. Fourth, it is so important to eliminate the audience factor. Having an audience of students or too many adults looking into the violent behaviour can encourage the behaviour and can also make the situation worse. Therefore, ask students to move on or go to the library, or etc. Some schools may have violent behaviour situations as a common occurrence, so it may be helpful to practice with students appropriate ways to respond to these events. Such practices could be to leave the room without getting too close or speaking to the student in question. Although you may not encounter a situation of violent behaviour and be required to de-escalate it, it is important to be prepared for the possibility of it. In the event that you are in a violent behaviour situation, it is important to keep the dialogue open with the student. Let them know that you have sent someone and hope that you can work together to get through this. Address the feelings they may be feeling. Let them know that things can be resolved without these extremes and that consequences can follow, but you hope they start to think clearly about making better choices. Have a meeting with the heads of the school and discuss what policies and procedures they have for responding to violent student behaviour. Jones and Jones provide a list for tips for dealing with aggressive behaviour. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Teacher tension can often agitate crisis behaviour. Always remain calm. Lower your voice. Slow your rate of speech. Arrange the environment to minimise risk. Give the student space. Be aware of your body stance. Dress in a manner that minimizes risk of injury. Remind misbehaving students of the consequence of their behavior. Allow verbal venting. Ignore irrelevant comments. Redirect the student back to the problem at hand. Provide choices. Set limits. Use physical restraint techniques as a last resort. Once the student is calm, use the incident to teach alternative appropriate ways to deal with aggression. In regards to Jane's situation, I remember being in shock, and my facial expression may have been of bewilderment. The class teacher removed my peer PST myself and herself out of the classroom for our protection. She called for assistance straight away from her mobile, and she kept an eye on Jane through the window. However, it wasn't until the next day that Jane and her parents were able to sit down with the principal and the behaviour manager specialist to actually talk calmly and break down the event that occurred the day before. They allowed Jane the opportunity to talk, but she was quiet and didn't want to discuss too much, other than there was an issue with one of her friends who made a comment about their friendship, which was taken out of context. The consequences were explained to Jane in a clear and calm voice so that she knew that her behaviour was not okay. The school suspended Jane for 1 day. I caught up again with my mentor teacher about a month or so after my placement, and she told me Jane was diagnosed with being on the autism spectrum and that preventatives were now set in place to avoid any future violent behaviour. As teachers, we may be teaching students who come to school with negative emotional states and poor problem-solving skills. By implementing these methods, we are providing ourselves skills to deal with these situations. Thank you.